The crystal glass felt cold against my fingers. Below me, the charity gala hummed with jazz music and expensive silverware. From the VIP balcony, I watched my father corner a waiter near the champagne fountain, gesturing proudly, claiming credit for wealth he never built. My mother stood beside him in her rented gown, flashing her practiced society smile. Looking at them now, you'd never guess that exactly 10 years ago, they dropped me at an airport with a broken bag and told me I was dead to them. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 28 years old. Before I tell you how I ended up owning the building my parents are currently standing in, hit subscribe if you understand what it feels like to realize the people who raised you feel nothing for you. Drop your age in the comments. I want to know who's on this journey with me. Let me take you back to my 18th birthday. Not to a party or celebration, but to the fluorescent lights of Terminal C at Boston Logan Airport. The smell of floor wax and stale coffee turned my stomach. I stood near security in faded sneakers, the soles peeling at the edges. My mother stood 3 feet away in brand new designer heels, refusing to look at me. My father held out a frayed navy duffel bag with a broken zipper. "Take it," he said. No warmth, no hesitation. The same clipped tone he used when firing contractors. Inside were 3 pairs of jeans, a few faded shirts, and a boarding pass. Phoenix, Arizona. One way. I'd never been west of the Mississippi. He leaned close. I could smell stale mints and burnt coffee on his breath. "This is your birthday gift," he whispered. "Don't come back. We only have room for our real investment." He meant Rachel, my sister, the golden child who never lifted a finger but received everything. I didn't cry. Crying in our house was reserved strictly for Rachel. I turned and walked toward the TSA line, placing the cheap bag on the conveyor belt. As I stepped through the metal detector, my phone buzzed. An alert from a credit monitoring app flashed on my cracked screen. "Happy 18th birthday! Your juvenile credit seal has been lifted." I opened it. A red number filled the screen. $150,000. 7 maxed-out credit cards. All opened using my social security number over the last 4 years. All in default. The trap clicked shut. My parents weren't just getting rid of a daughter they disliked. They were burying their financial crimes, sending me thousands of miles away so I couldn't fight back. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the gate. $0 in my pocket, a mountain of stolen debt dragging behind me. I had no idea that putting me on that plane would be the greatest mistake my parents ever made. To understand why they dumped me at Terminal C, you need to know what happened exactly 48 hours earlier. It started with Rachel. My sister was 16, 2 years younger, and treated our home like her personal luxury resort. Designer handbag and a magazine. Dad bought it the next day. Failed a test. Mom blamed the teacher. I lived the opposite reality. Straight A's, folded my own laundry in silence. In a toxic ecosystem, the golden child needs a villain to contrast against. That was me, the scapegoat. 2 days before my birthday, the temperature in our house plummeted. I sat at the kitchen island working on calculus when the front door swung open. My father marched inside, his face flushed deep red. He went straight to his study. Minutes later, he summoned my mother. Their voices bled through the oak door. $5,000 in cash was missing from his business ledger. I heard the word police. Then I heard Rachel slip into the kitchen. She refused to look at me, poured water with trembling fingers, and walked toward the study. Seconds later, all 3 of them turned their gazes directly on me. My father didn't ask questions. He marched upstairs, my mother close behind. I followed, a sour knot tightening in my stomach. They went straight to my bedroom and began tearing it apart. He stripped my blankets, dumped my desk drawers. Then he lifted the corner of my mattress. A thick manila envelope slid out and hit the floor. Stacks of $100 bills spilled across the rug. I looked up. Rachel stood in the hallway behind my mother's shoulder. The corners of her mouth twitched upward, a tiny, triumphant smirk. "I didn't put that there," I said steadily. I looked directly at Rachel. "You know exactly who took it. I can show you my digital footprint." I was at the library all afternoon. The timestamps will prove it. My father grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. Stop lying, he spat. My mother's hand swung fast. The slap cracked across my left cheek, snapping my head to the side. My ear rang a high, piercing note. Keep your filthy lies off your sister, she hissed. She's pure. You've always been corrupted. Something cold crystallized in my chest. I realized something profound. They didn't care about the truth. They needed me to be the thief. But banishing a child over $5,000 didn't align with my father's usual discipline. He was a man who controlled assets, not discarded them, unless the asset was about to become a legal liability. Then I remembered something from 8 years ago. I was 10, playing hide and seek. I'd crawled under the mahogany desk in my father's study. Before I could crawl out, he entered and locked the door. I held my breath, terrified. I watched his hands through the gap. He held commercial loan documents and an old letter from my grandfather, Victor. For 20 minutes, I listened to the scratch of a fountain pen. He was practicing. He was forging my grandfather's signature to secure a $500,000 loan. When he left, I fished the practice sheet from the trash and hid it in my jewelry box. I'd kept that secret for 8 years. Standing in my wrecked bedroom at 18, the puzzle snapped together. Tomorrow was my 18th birthday. The juvenile seal on my credit would lift at midnight. The $150,000 in fraudulent debt they'd racked up in my name would become visible and legally binding. They knew I was smart enough to trace those accounts. They knew I had the forged signature practice sheet that could send them to federal prison. They needed me out of state, penniless, and stripped of all credibility. A banished, broke teenager accused of stealing makes a terrible witness in a fraud trial. The airplane jolted as we began descent into Arizona. I looked out at the alien landscape, jagged red rock formations piercing the desert floor. I tightened my grip on the frayed canvas handles. My parents thought they were throwing me into a bottomless abyss. They believed a one-way ticket to a dusty town would guarantee my silence. But inside my jeans pocket, folded into a tiny square, was that piece of paper from 8 years ago. I was bracing for homelessness, yes, but I was also carrying the exact weapon needed to destroy everything they loved. The dry Arizona heat hit my face like an open oven door. I carried my bag through the small terminal, expecting to find a greasy taxi driver or no one at all. Instead, a woman commanded the space near baggage claim. She was in her late 50s with sharp features and silver hair pulled into an elegant twist. She wore a tailored ivory blazer and held an embossed placard with my name, Maya Chen. I approached slowly. She lowered the sign, her dark eyes sweeping over my oversized thrift store shirt and frayed bag. Not with pity, with analytical precision. "You're Maya," she stated, not a question. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Diana. I'm the chief estate attorney for your family trust." I blinked. "My family trust?" Diana took the bag from my hands, looking at the broken zipper with cold amusement. "Your parents are just as stupid as your grandfather predicted." She led me to a sleek black SUV. As we drove through the desert, she explained everything. "Your father believes he outsmarted a titan. 18 years ago, he forged your grandfather's signature to steal a $500,000 business loan. When Victor discovered the fraud, he could have sent him to prison, but he knew you'd end up in foster care." She pulled out documents. "So, Victor made a calculated retreat. He vanished, let them believe he died penniless, and built an empire in secret, waiting for the day they'd show their true colors." My heart raced. "You know about the credit cards?" "I know everything," Diana said smoothly. "We monitored your footprints since childhood. We knew the moment the seal lifted at midnight." I reached into my pocket, pulling out the folded practice sheet. "I saw him do it. I kept this." Diana's predatory smile widened. "Your father thought he severed ties with a weak, defenseless girl. He has no idea he just handed his executioner the murder weapon." We turned onto a private road flanked by towering red mesas. Ahead, iron gates swung open. Bronze lettering spelled Chen Holdings. Beyond the gates, vast fields of agave stretched toward the horizon. Modern agricultural facilities dotted the property. This wasn't barren land. This was an empire. We rounded a bend. A sprawling modern manor came into view, native stone, rich dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the desert sky. On the porch sat a motorized wheelchair. In it, an elderly man in a crisp linen shirt. His hair was stark white, his posture rigid and commanding. I walked up the stone steps. He raised his hand, holding a faded photograph, a newborn baby in a hospital blanket. Me. I looked from the photo to his face. His eyes were the exact same shade of deep brown as mine. My father claimed my grandfather died penniless before I was born. Yet here he sat, surrounded by unimaginable fortune, waiting. "You have your grandmother's jawline," Victor said, his voice low and steady. I sank into a chair across from him. "Why let them believe you were dead?" "Because fighting a toxic man in court creates collateral damage." He explained the forged loan, the threats to sever access to me, his decision to vanish rather than put me in foster care. I pulled out the practice sheet and smoothed it on the glass table between us. Victor traced the air above it, recognizing his stolen name. "When I confronted him, your father threatened to drag our family through scandal. He threatened to cut off my access to you, so I walked away, knowing a man who builds on stolen dirt will eventually sink." Diana slid financial briefs across the table. "He's been bleeding cash for 4 years. Vanity projects failed. Rachel's lifestyle drained his liquidity. They desperately needed fresh capital." I showed them my phone, the credit alert. $150,000 in defaulted debt. They used my social security number. They put me on a plane so I couldn't file a police report. Victor's cold smile appeared. "They threw you away to bury their crimes, but they threw you into the one fortress they cannot breach." He tapped a thick legal folder. "Open it." Inside was a court document with the state of Arizona seal. I scanned the text. Finalized decree, transfer of familial rights, adult adoption. "What is this?" 6 months ago, Diana initiated a covert legal maneuver, Victor explained. "Because you were nearing 18, and we had proof of their neglect and abandonment, I petitioned the court." He placed his hand over mine. "I legally adopted you as my daughter. You're no longer your father's descendant. You're my primary heir. You outrank your father in the corporate bloodline." The desert wind seemed to stop. "My parents banished me to strip my power," I whispered. "But their cruelty crowned me." Diana suggested, "We can contact federal authorities tomorrow. Identity theft across state lines carries mandatory prison time. With your practice sheet, your father faces decades." I looked at the phone, picturing police arriving at their mansion. It was tempting. Swift justice, but too easy. "No," I said. Diana raised an eyebrow. Victor studied my face with keen interest. "No police," I repeated. "If we send them to prison, they become martyrs. The state seizes their assets. I don't want to watch from the sidelines." I handed the practice sheet to Victor. "Put this in your vault. I don't want them in a cell. I want them awake in their expensive house while their walls cave in. I want to wait until they think they've survived. Then I'm going to take everything they love." Victor let out a low chuckle. "You're a Chen," he declared. The sun dipped below the red mesas. A new hunger settled into my bones. The game was no longer about surviving my family. It was about outsmarting them. 4 years later, I didn't spend my time lounging. I traded faded sneakers for tailored loafers and stepped into Victor's study. He treated me like a junior associate. Our mornings began before sunrise. He pushed thick folders across his desk, profit and loss statements, acquisition targets. "Numbers don't lie, Maya," he'd rasp. "Ledgers expose the truth." I enrolled at a prestigious university, double major, finance and computer science. I needed to understand both capital movement and the digital architecture controlling it. I learned to code predictive algorithms during lunch. I studied corporate tax law at night. The terrified teenager who wept over stolen cash vanished. A cold, competent operator emerged. Meanwhile, Diana kept watch on Boston. Quarterly reports detailed my biological family's decay. My father was drowning. His LLC hemorrhaged cash. He lost commercial leases, took predatory, high-interest loans just to cover payroll. Rachel enrolled at a vanity college, charging exorbitant tuition to credit lines our father couldn't afford. She failed introductory courses, dropped out halfway through sophomore year, retreated to the mansion with nothing to show but curated Instagram posts. They were starving, consuming their own resources to maintain an illusion. At 22, I graduated summa cum laude. Victor attended in his wheelchair, wearing a tailored suit. Diana stood beside him, clapping with sharp precision. They were the family I chose. But time is the one asset you can't acquire through hostile takeover. Victor's health declined shortly after graduation. His heart began to fail. We moved his medical bed into the study. I assumed control of daily operations, signing transfers, negotiating acquisitions, managing investments under his fading gaze. The end came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I sat beside his bed, holding his weathered hand. "You own the room now," he whispered. He closed his eyes. The rhythm stopped. I sat in silence, letting clean, honorable grief wash over me. Because of the secret adoption Diana orchestrated, there was no probate delay. At 22, I seamlessly inherited a $40 million empire. But Victor's passing triggered automated legal protocols. Death certificates are public record. The ghost was officially documented as deceased. The vultures in Boston were about to smell blood. 2 weeks after we laid Victor to rest, a clerk in Suffolk County processed an interstate estate notification. My father received a certified letter. He sliced it open, expecting another past due notice. Instead, his eyes scanned the estate of Victor Chen. Verified valuation: $40 million in liquid capital, diversified assets, premium real estate. The man he told his country club died penniless, had secretly built a kingdom. The shock lasted seconds before greed swallowed it whole. They didn't feel remorse. They saw a winning lottery ticket. They assumed I was a naive 22-year-old sitting on fortune they believed rightfully belonged to the bloodline's son. They found a flashy Boston litigator. He filed a petition contesting the estate, spinning a narrative that I had exerted undue influence over a mentally compromised senior. A process server drove to our Sedona gates and handed the papers to security. Diana laid the documents on my desk. She didn't look worried. She looked deeply insulted. They're attempting to siege a stone fortress with wooden pitchforks. Diana didn't schedule a court date. She drafted a response designed to eradicate the threat in one strike. She compiled a leather binder. Exhibit A, the finalized Arizona adult adoption decree, proving I was Victor's primary heir. My father had no standing to contest. Exhibit B, the lethal blow, a meticulously organized timeline of the identity theft on my 18th birthday. IP addresses, credit application timestamps, defaulted balances, plus a drafted, unsigned cover letter to the FBI detailing multi-year wire fraud and identity theft. We overnighted the binder to the litigator's office. The attorney opened it expecting a settlement offer. Instead, he read proof his clients were documented felons. He saw the adoption papers, rendering his lawsuit frivolous. He looked at the drafted FBI letter and realized he'd been weaponized for extortion. He sent a terse email withdrawing representation, citing ethical conflicts. He abandoned them instantly. Back in their neighborhood, my parents retreated into humiliated panic. Every doorbell made them jump, expecting federal agents. They spent weeks terrified, waiting for the trap to snap shut. When Diana confirmed the lawsuit was withdrawn, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the desert sun. Winning defense felt hollow. Playing defense from Arizona was a coward's tactic. If you want to dismantle a corrupt structure, you can't throw stones from afar. You walk inside the building and remove the load-bearing pillars yourself. I turned to Diana. Cancel the Phoenix satellite lease. Start scouting commercial high-rises in the Northeast. Premium Square. Footage. Something visible. Something undeniable. Diana's predatory smile spread. Which city? Boston, I said. We're moving corporate headquarters to Massachusetts. The desert healed my wounds and forged my armor, but it was time to leave safety. The predator was moving directly into the vulture's nest. 10 years later. The Boston skyline cut a jagged silhouette against the morning sun. I stood behind floor-to-ceiling glass on the 45th floor of my newly acquired high-rise in the financial district. 10 years had passed since Terminal C. Today, at 28, I wore a tailored graphite suit and held black coffee, surveying the city below. Over the decade, we'd expanded beyond real estate and agriculture, dominating educational technology. I'd funneled corporate profits into a philanthropic venture, the Victor Foundation. It provided full-ride scholarships and legal advocacy for displaced youth surviving financial abuse. Just yesterday, I'd signed a tuition grant for a 17-year-old whose parents emptied her college savings for luxury car leases. Reading her application felt like looking in a mirror. Protecting those kids became my life's work, transforming childhood trauma into a functional weapon for others, the industry noticed. A national business magazine placed my face on their annual 30 Under 30 Innovators cover. The article highlighted my dedication to protecting vulnerable teenagers. I didn't mention my parents by name. I let the subtext hang heavy, designed to humiliate anyone in their country club circle who knew my origin story. While I smiled for magazine covers, Diana operated in shadows. My father's LLC finally reached Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Decades of frivolous spending left him gasping for liquidity. Traditional banks refused his calls. He took predatory loans just to keep the house from foreclosure. Diana walked into my office, placing a slim black folder on my desk, her signature shark-like grin. The final shell company acquisition cleared this morning. I opened the folder. Through a labyrinth of anonymous holding firms, we'd quietly purchased the entirety of my father's defaulted commercial debt. We'd also acquired the promissory note on his primary residence. My father was utterly clueless. He thought he owed millions to faceless lenders. He didn't realize his estranged daughter, the scapegoat he banished a decade ago, was now his sole creditor. I held the deed to the roof over his head. All I had to do was give Diana a single nod, and we could seize his assets before lunch. But springing the trap in darkness offered no catharsis. I needed him to know exactly who held the blade. I needed them to walk out into the light. The afternoon of the Charity Tech Summit arrived. I stood in the grand ballroom watching crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across polished floors. I'd sent 3 premium VIP passes to my father, mother, and Rachel, along with a planted internal memo suggesting Rachel was being considered for a 6-figure VP of marketing position. The bait was set. As sunset painted the horizon, the brass doors swung open. A string quartet played. The press corps arrived, setting up cameras. Then a standard black rideshare pulled to the curb. My father stepped out first, tugging at a rented tuxedo too tight across his shoulders. My mother followed, adjusting a faux diamond necklace. Rachel emerged in an ostentatious gown, fighting with the hem. They walked toward the velvet ropes, chins tilted upward in pathetic arrogance. From the VIP balcony, I watched them enter. They moved with exaggerated swagger. My father puffed his chest like a rooster. My mother clutched a designer clutch bought on credit years ago. Rachel constantly adjusted her sequined gown. They believed they were returning royalty, a kingdom temporarily managed by their naive daughter, ready to be handed back. I watched pure dramatic irony unfold near the champagne fountain. Diana stood there radiating effortless power in an emerald gown. My father spotted her, saw wealth and authority, and strutted over with a predatory smile. "Excuse me, I'm David Chen, the patriarch," he interrupted, extending a hand Diana ignored. "I assume you're familiar with my daughter Maya." Diana lowered her champagne flute with icy precision. "The patriarch? How fascinating." "Oh yes," my mother chimed in. "We provided foundational support for everything." Tonight, Maya's always been driven, but she needed our guidance. We're so proud to fold her operations back into the family portfolio. Rachel shoved past a waiter. And I'm stepping in as the new VP of marketing. Maya desperately needed fresh, modern talent. Diana took a slow sip, poker face intact. She looked at each of them, letting silence stretch uncomfortably. I see, she murmured, predatory smile touching her mouth. I know exactly who your daughter is. Tonight will be an unforgettable milestone for your entire family. My father beamed, oblivious to the lethal subtext. They drifted deeper into the ballroom, but their arrogance quickly hit invisible walls. Rachel tried to flag down waitstaff. Bring Vintage Reserve to the executive lounge. We'll take our meetings there. The captain offered a polite but firm nod. The executive lounge is restricted to the CEO and her legal counsel. May I offer you a glass from the main bar? Rachel's face flushed. My father approached the private boardroom flanked by 2 tactical agents. He reached for the brass handle. Sir, the larger agent stated, stepping into his path. This area is secured. My father lifted his VIP credential. I'm David Chen. The CEO is my daughter. Step aside. Your pass authorizes the main ballroom only, sir. The executive suite is sealed. I watched my father's jaw clench. He retreated, humiliated, realizing they had no actual power. The ecosystem was actively rejecting them. I checked my watch. It was time. I stepped away from the railing and moved toward the backstage elevator, carrying the frayed navy duffel bag in my left hand. The chandeliers dimmed. Ambient jazz faded. A single powerful spotlight illuminated the acrylic podium. The announcer's deep voice echoed, "Please welcome the founder and CEO of Chen Holdings, Maya Chen." Through the curtain gap, I watched my family react. My father grabbed my mother by the elbow, shoving past tech investors. They positioned themselves front row, less than 10 feet from the podium. My father adjusted his tuxedo, grinning widely. My mother dabbed her eye with tissue. Rachel prepared to wave. They were waiting for public tribute, expecting me to acknowledge their support and announce Rachel's new position. They believed they'd won. They had no idea they were standing on a trap door, and my hand was on the lever. The velvet curtains parted. Applause washed over me. I stepped into the spotlight, walking with measured steps. My heels clicked a steady rhythm. In my right hand, the frayed navy duffel bag. Its broken zipper clinked softly beneath the roaring ovation. I reached the glass podium. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I looked straight down at the front row. My father stood clapping enthusiastically, chest swelled, broad grin. My mother dabbed her eye with tissue, feigning maternal emotion. Rachel shifted her weight, ready to be summoned on stage. They looked so certain. I lifted the canvas bag and set it on the pristine podium. The heavy fabric landed with a dull thud. The applause tapered off. A murmur rippled through the front rows. People noticed the bag. Faded navy canvas, frayed handles, peeling rubber. It looked like trash on $1 million altar. I adjusted the microphone. Let the quiet stretch. Welcome, I began. Tonight we celebrate innovation and growth. We're here to discuss investments. But before we talk technology, I want to talk about baggage. I let the word linger. In the corporate sector, we use that term for toxic assets, failing subsidiaries, liabilities that drag a profitable enterprise into the red. We divest from baggage. We cut our losses. I looked directly into my father's eyes. His grin faltered. I unzipped the broken track. The harsh tearing sound echoed through the microphone. In our personal lives, baggage takes different forms. The weight of conditional love, the crushing debt of surviving a home where you were never meant to thrive. My mother lowered her tissue, knuckles white. Rachel glanced nervously at journalists. 10 years ago today, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. On my 18th birthday, I wasn't given a celebration. I was driven to Boston Logan Airport. I was handed this exact broken bag and a one-way economy ticket to the Arizona desert. The ballroom went dead silent. I was told to walk through security and never return. My father looked me in the eye, pointed at this bag, and said, "This is your gift. Don't come back. We only have room for our real investment." A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. A tech investor covered her mouth. A journalist typed furiously. My mother looked around, eyes wide like a trapped animal. Rachel tugged frantically on my mother's sleeve, lips forming. Make her stop. But there was nowhere to run. Boxed in by oak doors, flanked by security, pinned by a spotlight they eagerly walked into. When you throw a child away, you make a significant gamble, I told the silent room. You bet they'll sink under their abandonment. You bet the desert will swallow them whole. I walked around the podium. I wanted them to see my posture, my suit, my unyielding calm. But sometimes the desert teaches you to survive. Sometimes isolation forces you to study the very people who threw you away. I looked at Rachel. She shrank into her sequins. Manufactured confidence stripped away. They sent me away to protect their fragile ecosystem. They believed they excised a liability. I reached into my jacket, pulling out a sleek black presentation clicker. The screens flanking the stage hummed, waiting. My father found a fraction of his voice, shifting weight, mouth opening to protest. But the distance was too great. His unamplified voice was mute. I didn't come here to ask for apology, I concluded, voice dropping an octave. I didn't invite my biological relatives to mend bonds. I invited them to the front row to witness the harvest of seeds they planted 10 years ago. I pressed the button. Let me show you what I built from that abandonment. The screens ignited. Brilliant white light cast stark shadows. Tonight we celebrate innovation, but true innovation requires structural integrity. You can't build sustainable enterprise on fraud. The center screen transitioned to a high-resolution scan of crumpled paper, blue ink loops across the display. 18 years ago, a man practiced forging his own father's signature to secure a $500,000 loan. He stole that capital to build his firm. He built his entire country club lifestyle on a stolen identity. I watched my father. Color drained from his face. His eyes darted from projection to my face, mind racing. He never realized a 10-year-old girl was hiding under his desk. I pressed the clicker. The lateral screens flared, columns of financial data, 7 credit card accounts, balances glowing warning red, total $150,000. Identity theft is pervasive, but the most devastating breaches happen at the kitchen table. These 7 accounts were opened using my social security number before I could drive. They were maxed out, defaulted, buried. The juvenile seal lifted on my 18th birthday, the exact day I was handed this bag and banished. I wasn't exiled for independence. I was exiled to ensure the statute of limitations expired before I could file federal police reports. The reaction was visceral. A venture capitalist shook his head in disgust. A state senator crossed her arms, expression hardening. The elite society my parents worshipped was analyzing them like biohazard. My father reached breaking point. He shot up from his chair, knocking his champagne flute to the floor. Crystal shattered. He pointed a trembling finger at the podium, neck veins bulging, flushing deep purple. He opened his mouth, attempting to shout denial, but he was a single unamplified man in a cavernous hall. I stood behind a microphone connected to surround sound. His shouts registered as pathetic, unintelligible croaks. I didn't interrupt. I let him scream into the void. He realized no one was listening. He looked at surrounding faces, seeing only revulsion. He slowly sank back, deflated. I turned to the captivated audience. We can't rewrite trauma history, but we dictate the currency it becomes. I'm proud to announce a $5 million initial endowment to expand the Victor Foundation, providing legal representation and full tuition for young adults surviving familial financial abuse. I pressed the clicker one final time. The screens shifted to the Chen Holdings corporate crest. Furthermore, as CEO, I have a fiduciary duty to sever ties with toxic liabilities. Effective immediately, Chen Holdings is divesting from all associated legacy operations linked to David Chen's LLC. We don't do business with fraudulent entities. We don't subsidize moral bankruptcy. Thank you for your time. your investments, and your unwavering commitment to genuine integrity. Enjoy your evening." I stepped back from the podium. For 3 seconds, the ballroom remained frozen. Then a single investor stood and began to clap. Within moments, 500 people rose to their feet, delivering a deafening standing ovation. I looked down at the front row. They didn't stand. My father stared blankly at his knees, stripped of reputation, dignity, future. My mother covered her face, hiding from camera flashes. Rachel sat rigid, curled inward, realizing there was no executive job, no six-figure salary, no rescue, paralyzed by the weight of public humiliation. I turned and walked toward the stage exit, the frayed duffel bag still resting on the podium like a monument to their failure. I descended into the dimly lit corridor, standing in the VIP alcove with Diana and Marcus, waiting for the doors to swing open. The trap had sprung, but the final confrontation was just beginning. The heavy oak doors burst open. My father pushed through, rented tuxedo hanging crooked, breathing heavily. My mother followed, mascara smudged, society facade dissolved. Rachel trailed them, gripping her sequined dress, face contorted in terror and entitled rage. They barged into the alcove, expecting a frightened daughter willing to cower. They found a CEO standing alongside her chief legal counsel, entirely unbothered. "I'm going to destroy you," my father spat, voice devoid of polished charm. He jabbed a shaking finger toward my face. "I'm calling the best litigators in the city. I'll sue you for every dime. You humiliated me. You slandered my name in front of my investors." Diana stepped forward, silk emerald gown brushing the leather chair. She didn't raise her voice. She simply offered a chilling, predatory smile. "Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, David. You can't sue someone for projecting your own verified crimes. Any attorney foolish enough to take your case would face immediate disbarment the moment we submit discovery files." My father's jaw clenched, vein pulsing furiously. He knew she was right, but his ego refused surrender. He turned back to me, attempting a different angle. "You think you're so clever? You think embarrassing us changes anything? My company's restructuring. I'm securing new capital next week. We'll rebuild, and you'll be a laughingstock for this pathetic, dramatic stunt." I let out a slow, measured breath. The profound delusion was almost fascinating. "Your company isn't restructuring," I corrected, tone dropping to quiet, lethal register. "Your company is dead, and you're not securing new capital. Your primary lenders abandoned you months ago. You sold your toxic debt to a secondary holding firm just to keep the lights on." My father narrowed his eyes, genuine confusion piercing his rage. "How do you know about the secondary lenders?" I held my hand out. Diana placed a thick black leather folder onto my palm, heavier than the presentation clicker, carrying the weight of a decade of strategic patience. I held it out toward my father. He hesitated, staring as if it were a live grenade. Slowly, his shaking hand took it. He flipped the cover open. "Because I am the holding firm," I explained, watching his eyes scan the dense legal text. "Through anonymous corporate entities, Chen Holdings purchased the entirety of your defaulted commercial debt." My father stopped breathing. Color drained from his face for the second time that evening. He recognized his own desperate signatures on the promissory notes. The realization crashed over him like a physical blow. He didn't owe money to a faceless banking institution. He owed millions to the daughter he discarded. I owned his failure. "I didn't just divest from your failing enterprise," I continued, letting cold reality settle into his bones. "I bought it and I'm liquidating it. Look at the second page." His trembling fingers fumbled with the heavy paper. He flipped to the next document, stamped with the Suffolk County Superior Court seal. "That's the finalized bankruptcy order for your LLC," I stated. "And directly beneath it is the foreclosure decree for your primary residence. I own the mortgage to your house, David. The sheriff's department is scheduled to post eviction notices at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. You have exactly 12 hours to pack your belongings and vacate my property." My mother let out a sharp, jagged sob. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto a leather chair, burying her face in her hands. The faux diamond necklace suddenly looked painfully cheap against the backdrop of total ruin. "You can't do this," my mother cried, voice muffled. "You're our daughter. We're your family. Blood is blood." I looked down at the woman who slapped me to protect a lie, who stood silently in Terminal C while I was banished with nothing. I felt no pity, no lingering filial obligation, only clean, sterile closure of a surgical amputation. "You severed our bloodline at airport security 10 years ago," I replied, voice devoid of warmth. "You made a calculated decision to throw me away. I'm merely executing the consequences of that choice." Rachel, who'd remained paralyzed near the doorway, suddenly lunged forward. Panic stripped away the last remnants of her gaudy confidence. She remembered the wrinkled memorandum, the 6-figure salary, the executive title she believed was waiting to rescue her. "But what about the job?" Rachel demanded, voice shrill and desperate. "The internal memo. You said you were hiring me as VP of marketing. You said my profile was exactly what this company needed. You promised equity. If I have that salary, I can pay the mortgage. I can fix this." I looked at my younger sister, the golden child who stole $5,000 and smiled while my bedroom was torn apart. The vanity project who dropped out of college to curate a fake digital life. She actually believed she was qualified to run a department within a $40 million tech empire. I tilted my head, studying her desperate, tear-streaked face. "There is no vice president position, Rachel," I said, voice softening into pure pity. "The memo was bait, a shiny object designed to ensure you walked into this building tonight. You possess 0 qualifications for an executive role in my company." Rachel's mouth fell open. A strangled, helpless sound escaped her throat. "But we have nothing," she whispered, reality of impending homelessness finally penetrating her delusion. "We have no money, nowhere to go." I maintained my steady gaze, offering her the exact same level of compassion she offered me 10 years ago. "There is one opening available," I noted, gesturing vaguely toward the grand ballroom beyond the closed doors. "We need a reliable night shift janitor to maintain the lobby floors. Minimum wage, no equity. You can start Monday." The silence in the alcove was absolute. The final devastating blow landed, extinguishing any lingering hope. They were stripped of wealth, reputation, delusions. They stood in sterile light of my secured space, entirely ruined by the hands of the girl they tried to bury in the desert. Marcus stepped forward, tactical training evident in fluid, unhurried movements. He didn't grab my father by the collar or physically drag him. He merely occupied the space, a solid wall of muscle and authority, gently but firmly herding them toward the double doors. 2 additional security agents flanked my mother and Rachel, expressions blank, postures conveying absolute, undeniable mandate. Time for discussion had expired. The execution was complete. Now the refuse required disposal. I stood beside Diana watching the slow, humiliating procession. They didn't fight the escort. The revelation of total financial ruin had severed their nervous systems. They moved like sleepwalkers, stunned and hollow, shuffling toward the exit. As they emerged into the grand ballroom periphery, immediate karmic fallout began. The 500 guests buzzed with electric energy of a freshly witnessed execution. Boston's elite society is a small, interconnected ecosystem driven by reputation and perceived wealth. When a predator senses weakness, consumption is swift and merciless. I watched from the shadows as my father passed tech investors who, hours ago, he'd attempted to charm. Now they looked at him with open revulsion. One already had his phone pressed to his ear, calling his risk assessment department, instructing them to freeze any remaining credit lines associated with David Chen. The contagion spread rapidly. Another investor pulled her husband away as my mother approached, physically creating distance as if failure were transmissible disease. The social capital my parents spent 30 years cultivating evaporated in 30 minutes. They were no longer esteemed, patriarch and matriarch. They were toxic assets, documented frauds, the punchline to a brutal public joke. Marcus guided them through the grand lobby, past towering floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers toward the main glass doors. A sudden heavy rainstorm swept across the downtown district. The downpour hammered the pavement outside, creating a slick, reflective surface under street lamps. Rachel lagged behind, heels clicking unevenly. The reality of the janitorial offer had finally pierced her vanity. As they approached the valet stand, a local society blogger raised a professional camera. The flash blinded Rachel. She threw her hands up, letting out a sharp, hysterical sob. She stumbled backward, her rented gown catching on a decorative planter. The delicate fabric tore with a loud rip. She lost her footing and fell onto wet pavement. Driving rain instantly soaked her hair, ruining her makeup. The blogger didn't offer help. He simply adjusted his lens and kept shooting, documenting the precise moment the golden child plummeted into mud. My mother tried to shield Rachel from cameras, her own faux necklace slipping sideways, her designer clutch falling into a puddle. They looked pathetic, stripped of armor, exposed to elements and unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. My father stood under the small awning, shivering in his rented tuxedo. He looked back through the glass doors, searching the lobby, hoping for final reprieve, a sign the punishment was merely harsh lesson and not permanent sentence. He found only Marcus standing resolute just inside the threshold. Marcus reached into his tailored jacket and withdrew a plain white envelope. He stepped through automatic doors, rain immediately spotting his shoulders, and held the envelope out toward my father. My father hesitated, hands trembling. He looked at the white paper, then up at Marcus's stoic face. Slowly, he reached out and took it. He tore the flap open, wet fingers struggling with adhesive. He pulled out 3 rectangular slips of paper. They weren't checks. They weren't legal reprieves. They were economy class one-way bus tickets. The destination printed on thermal paper, a notoriously cheap, run-down motel on the furthest city outskirts, an area known for transient laborers and abandoned strip malls. The only shelter they could afford now that I owned their mortgage. My father stared at the tickets, cheap thermal ink already smudging in damp air. He looked up at Marcus, eyes wide, pleading for a different outcome. Marcus met his gaze with dead, unwavering precision. He leaned in slightly, ensuring his words cut through the driving rain. "This is your gift," Marcus stated, voice a low, lethal echo of decade-old cruelty. "Don't come back." My father recoiled as if physically struck. The symbolism landed with devastating accuracy. The circle was complete. I watched the entire sequence from the VIP balcony, holding fresh, sparkling water, condensation cool against my palm. I didn't feel sudden, euphoric joy. I didn't need to cheer or gloat. I felt profound, settling peace. The heavy, suffocating weight I'd carried since Terminal C finally dissipated, leaving my chest clear, my lungs full. Diana stepped up beside me, resting her forearms on the mahogany railing. She watched my family huddled under the small awning, waiting for a rideshare they likely couldn't afford, clutching bus tickets like lifelines. "They're smaller than I imagined," Diana noted, voice quiet, almost reflective. When you read legal briefs and financial ledgers, you picture monsters. But looking at them now, they're just pathetic, ordinary people who made terrible choices. "They were never monsters," I replied, taking a slow sip of water. "They were just cowards who weaponized my potential because they lacked their own." I turned away from the glass, leaving the balcony, walking back into the warmth of the grand ballroom. The execution was finished, the past was successfully liquidated. I was surrounded by the empire I built, from ashes of their abandonment, supported by the brilliant, formidable woman who chose me when biology failed. I was entirely unbothered, stepping into the rest of my life. 6 months later, the dust finally settled over the ruins. My father fought the bankruptcy liquidation for 2 months, burning through negligible credit to hire discount attorneys. But a crumbling foundation can't support a legal siege. Suffolk County Superior Court formally seized his assets, auctioned his properties, finalized total liquidation of his LLC. He currently resides in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the industrial sector, miles from country club lawns he used to patrol. My mother, stripped of society luncheons and faux diamonds, reportedly spends her days managing the suffocating reality of a court-mandated budget. Rachel experienced the most severe gravitational drop. Cut off entirely from deep pockets that funded her vanity, she faced an employment market that cares nothing for curated social media aesthetics. Without a college degree or a single reference, her options evaporated. I heard through the corporate grapevine she secured a position folding sweaters at a mid-tier retail outlet in a suburban mall. She works the closing shift, earning minimum wage, required to clock in under supervision of a manager younger than she is. The irony is almost poetic. She spent adolescence stealing money to fund her wardrobe. Now she spends adulthood organizing clothes she can no longer afford to buy. I don't employ private investigators. I know these details because desperate people can't resist broadcasting their misery when they feel entitled to rescue. On a quiet Tuesday, an email slipped past my corporate spam filters. The sender, my mother. The text lacked elegant, passive-aggressive prose of her previous letter. This was raw, unfiltered panic. She detailed their cramped living conditions, complained about noise from new neighbors, outlined past due rent they owed their landlord. The final paragraph was a direct plea, begging me to remember the bond of family and issue a small temporary loan to keep them from facing a second eviction. I looked at the glowing screen. 10 years ago, an email like that would have triggered severe anxiety. I would have agonized over filial obligations, questioned if I was a cruel daughter, wondered if their suffering was somehow my responsibility. But I was 28 years old now. I commanded a $40 million empire built from ashes of their abandonment. I understood the architecture of their manipulation perfectly. Responding to that email, even with firm rejection, would validate their tactic. It would signal the door remained slightly ajar. I moved the cursor over the trash icon and clicked delete. I didn't draft a reply. I didn't forward it to Diana for archiving. I simply erased the text from existence, enforcing the ultimate unbreakable boundary. The silence I offered them was far more definitive than any verbal rejection could ever be. This brings me to a quiet Sunday morning on the balcony of my penthouse. The Boston skyline stretched before me, bathed in soft golden light of early autumn. The air felt crisp, entirely devoid of suffocating humidity. I held a mug of dark roast coffee, heat warming my palms. I stood looking out over the city and realized something profound. I felt nothing but absolute resonant peace. The phantom weight of the fraying duffel bag no longer hung from my shoulders. The echoes of my father's rage and my mother's slaps had finally faded into total silence. I want to speak directly to anyone listening who currently feels trapped under the crushing weight of a toxic household. I know how heavy the guilt can be. Society constantly reinforces the narrative that blood is a sacred, unbreakable contract. We're told to forgive and forget, to honor our parents regardless of their trespasses, to keep peace at the expense of our own sanity. That narrative is a dangerous lie. Family isn't defined by shared biology. Family is defined by consistency. Family is who shows up when you're terrified. Family is who protects you from predators, even when the predators live down the hall. Family is who tells you harsh, necessary truth and who stands beside you while you rebuild from wreckage. Victor was my family. He sacrificed his own reputation to ensure I stayed out of foster system. Diana is my family. She armed me with legal knowledge, required to protect myself, fighting my battles before I was strong enough to fight them alone. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. It doesn't make you heartless, vindictive, or cold. Setting boundaries makes you healthy. It's the fundamental act of psychological self-defense. When you recognize a relationship is actively destroying your peace, you possess the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to change your locks, delete contact information, and refuse to participate in chaos. If you're currently surviving an environment where your worth is conditional, I want you to remember the girl standing in Terminal C. She was terrified, broke, and convinced she was the problem. She didn't know she was carrying the blueprints to an empire. You possess the same potential, the survival skills you're developing right now, the hypervigilance, the resilience, the ability to read a room. Those aren't just trauma responses. Those are tools. When you finally escape the toxic ecosystem, you can reforge those tools to build an extraordinary life. You can transform your suffering into a foundation. If my story resonated with you, if you understand the terrifying liberation of finally walking away from people who tried to break you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your own experience. Tell me how you established your boundaries. Tell me how you built your chosen family. Your story might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to hear today. Remember that forgiveness is a personal transaction you complete for your own peace of mind. But reconciliation requires two healthy participants. You never owe anyone access to your life if they can't respect the threshold. You define your worth, nobody else. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.